Cameron tonight. Carl, thanks so much. All week we've taken a look at the problems of the government spending more than it takes in depth from a variety of different angles. Tonight, the fifth and final part of our series, The Cost of Spending, looks at solutions. Here's Bret Baier.
The urgency we hear about our country's fiscal situation from politicians sounds, well, urgent.
Washington's got a spending problem, not a revenue problem.
What is lacking are the revenues.
There has to be revenue in addition to cuts.
This deficit could crush the future generations.
Our nation has been on an unsustainable fiscal path for some time.
The clock is ticking, and we're running out of time.
And then there's that national debt clock again. Always in the background, reminding both parties that whatever the solutions, they do need to happen pretty quickly, and they need to be big. Because for many, it's hard to even get their head around how big a problem we face. Experts agree that drastic changes are required to actually eliminate the deficit, pay off the debt, and return America to a fiscally sustainable path. But how much would some of the most talked about solutions actually save? Shutting down the post office on Saturdays would help save about $3 billion. Changing Medicare eligibility from 65 to 67 would bring back $6 billion. A plan proposed by Senator Tom Coburn that cuts non-essential defense programs, well, that would save $7 billion. Capping tax deductions at $25,000 would keep $68 billion safe. And proposed additional taxes on the top 2% of income earners, well, that would bring in $82 billion. So hypothetically, if all of these proposed solutions were to be enacted, we'd spend $166 billion less a year. That seems like a lot, right? Well, it is, but not when you compare it to how much we spend a year, which is roughly $3.5 trillion. That's what we spent in 2012. And it's even less when you compare it to our total debt, $16 trillion and rising. So enough about the problem and how small the possible solutions are. How do we as a country at least start, to deal with this massive issue? Economist John Taylor wrote the book First Principles, 5 Keys to Restoring America's Prosperity.
Well, the problem was created in Washington. It can be fixed in Washington. I have to think in terms of the economics, what's the best thing to do in the economics? And for me, that's to gradually reduce spending as a share of GDP. That means reduce the growth rate, as you pointed out. Just go back a few years before the crisis. That shouldn't be that hard to do. That's what a family would be doing if they were borrowing too much. They'd just go back to where they were before the problems began. I think that's really number one. Number two, we have an opportunity now to reform our tax code that will also stimulate economic growth and work on this high unemployment rate. And longer term, there are some reforms in Social Security, Medicare in particular, that can reduce really what is expected to be an explosion of spending into something that's more sensible, more sustainable.
Former Democratic Senator Evan Bayh narrows the solutions down to 2 categories.
Number one, getting future rates of entitlement spending under control, particularly in the health care arena. Those are the big numbers. Secondly, even modest increases in the rate of growth of the economy, even 0.5% more per year, compounded out over 10, 15 years, that generates huge money, which makes it so much easier to solve this problem in a way that's politically palatable.
Alice Rivlin, Bill Clinton's budget director, is one of the only people to be on both of the most prominent deficit debt commissions, Simpson-Bowles and Rivlin-Domenici, where she was a co-chair.
We actually hammered out a report. It turned out to be very similar to the Simpson-Bowles report because the arithmetic drives you there. You have to slow the growth of the health care entitlements. You have to put Social Security back on a firm foundation. And you have to raise more revenues through a reformed tax code. Everybody who's looked at it comes out that way. Now, I think a very substantial number of members of Congress of both parties understand that, but they're caught in this political game of blaming each other.
Economist Robert Genetsky is author of the book Classical Economic Principles and the Wealth of Nations.
My view is if you ever want to get this economy growing and growing at a healthy, rapid rate, in order to do it, you will have to cut government's costs on public programs, either direct government spending or regulatory compliance expenditures or the total. And unfortunately, at least in the regulatory compliance area, we're moving in the opposite direction.
Arthur Brooks, president of the American Enterprise Institute, says he's actually optimistic.
I'm actually convinced that now is a better time than ever. We have a golden opportunity to do some of the things that we should have done a really long time ago. We have an opportunity to actually shape the entitlement crisis or turn the entitlement crisis around in ways that we couldn't have 3 or 4 years ago, even though we needed to do that 3 or 4 years ago. The key thing that we have to remember is not to let this slip away. The fact that we're in this crisis today presents America with an opportunity to help save itself.
The question is whether lawmakers on both sides of the aisle will see that as well. In Washington, Bret Baier, Fox News.